Welcome to another episode of the Nigerian File. I am your host, August Badagry. It's been a long time since I've done a podcast. Part of that is due to the pandemic, also trips to Nigeria, as well as other personal stuff to attend to over the past year. In any case, I'm back. I'd like to give a shout out first and foremost to the Kenganda channel for bringing a lot more visibility to my tiny channel as previously had, even despite the fact that I hadn't posted in a while. Thank you. Also to the commenters and recent subscribers that have jumped on and have asked some pretty interesting follow-ups to what I've done so far, and which I'll talk about specifically today. Today's episode is inspired by a podcast comment from last year. The podcast was last year named 3 Classes of Nigerians in the Diaspora. However, the comment was from last week. The comment from BLK Mail TV. It reads, "Very interesting. There is another class that was not addressed, and that is those who were born in Nigeria but raised in the diaspora, a group that was born and partly raised in Nigeria, being taught to return home after being established in the West, and would love to return but due to lack of connection find it difficult due to disenfranchisement or death or some other train." Interesting video though. Thank you for that comment, BLK Mail TV. You are absolutely right. Absolutely correct. That is a very interesting group. I know a few people in that group, but not too many personally. And that is actually something that some other of those classes I mentioned have in common. But this class, I think, is unique in that, as BLK Mail TV wrote, there is an expectation because the individual is born in Nigeria that they not only attempt to return, but really make a reconnection in a more concrete way with Nigeria. And so you have 2 issues. First of all, the sense of not a nostalgia or romanticization of returning to Nigeria, but an actual connection, being born there, a citizen of birth. Then, Nigerian parents, being who they are, obviously want to have their legacy solidified in a very concrete way. Second, because there's a separation, particularly if the Nigerian-born diasporan has left early enough to lose connection over time, especially if that individual has not returned. So the longer they're away, I can tell you, even from being from a different class of Nigerian in that category, once you're away long enough, things change and it's harder to reconnect, particularly if relatives no longer there, parents are no longer there, no other family members, no other real connection that you can easily make that attempt to return. So today I want to try to address that in so much as I can. Before I start, for those who haven't seen that original podcast I mentioned, 3 Classes of Nigerians in the Diaspora, please check that out so you can get additional context as to what I'm talking about. Then feel free to come back and continue listening to this podcast. For those who are familiar with that, feel free to stick around. For background, I was born in the United States and actually returned to Nigeria for nursery, which is equivalent to kindergarten in the West, and then did primary school in Nigeria, which is equivalent to elementary school in the West. Specifically, I would like to say the United States. I know not all the West uses elementary school the way the United States does, but essentially from nursery through the primary grades is what I spent in Nigeria. And so I did have a grasp of what Nigeria was like from pretty much toddlerhood onward through late childhood. And even after I'd returned to the United States for secondary school and so on, I still returned to Nigeria every summer for the whole summer. I was blessed enough that my family had the wherewithal to make that happen. I know not everybody has that opportunity, and I truly appreciate that. My parents, particularly my mother, was able to be the driver of that. So I really benefited and was able to stay connected in that way. The problem became at a certain point once I got, I would say, beginning of high school. I no longer went back every summer because it was just cost prohibitive for my mother and the situation economically she was in, the family was in, and just the economy. And so I didn't go back to Nigeria for quite some time, close to about 13 years. What made it easier for me, though, is that I still had family there. My father was still over there. I still had tons of uncles and aunts. Even though I'd lost contact with everybody I'd gone to school with, and a lot of my cousins that I was closest to were either in the United States or were in Europe. And so I still had it easier than some people. However, there were challenges. So if you're someone who hasn't been back for whatever reason, similar to what similar to what BLK Male TV mentioned, how do you skirt that chasm in order to try to reconnect, if that's something you want to do? So, here are my thoughts on that. First of all, it depends on your situation. Let's, for the sake of this discussion, start with what BLK Male TV mentioned. You're born in Nigeria. However, you've lived your formative years, I would say, over age 9, for example, or adolescent onward, outside of Nigeria, let's say, for example, in the United States. How do you build that bridge? How do you reconnect? So for me, one of the things that I found helpful is use the opportunities to come up. One of the first times I went back to Nigeria after going back every year, some 13, 14 years later, my aunt was getting married. I hadn't seen this aunt in probably about 20 years. Haven't really talked to her. But my mom's sister, there was a wedding. I said, you know what? This is a great opportunity to get back because I will see some familiar faces. A lot of things were changed, of course, culturally, environmentally, everything. The Nigeria I grew up in and came of age in the primary grades was a very different Nigeria. This was in the late 70s, early 80s. Nigeria was very resource rich in oil. There's a lot of prosperity vis-a-vis what we saw in, I would say, early 2000s and onward. And so even going back then, which was 2003, was a big culture shock for me. However, I could still connect with my family members that I hadn't seen in so long, even though I hadn't been there in a while. Okay, so that was an easy in. So first thing, any opportunity that gives you a premise to be there, ideally a funeral, ideally a wedding, but sometimes it could be a funeral. That's the second thing I want to point out. Those are probably two of the most popular opportunities, if you will, that I've found in my personal experience and the experience of others that you can use to reconnect, because you're going to be around at the very least, not even if it's not someone you know directly, there's going to be someone who's a friend of a friend, for example, or a friend of the families, that there will be some sense of, of them at the very least, and it'll be more conducive to you to get more of a guided passage through reconnecting, versus if you just decided, okay, I'm going to go to Nigeria, I haven't been there ever, or maybe I was there when I was 5 years old, and I don't really know anybody that I can reach to or knows I'm coming. It's much easier if you're going, again, a wedding, for example, or a funeral. I would start there. And here's the funny thing about Nigerian culture. It doesn't have to be your wedding. Okay? Hear me out. Hear me out. I'm willing to bet that if you have any connection with Nigeria, friends or something, right? There's likely to be some event like a wedding, but it doesn't have to be a wedding. But there's likely to be some event that you can use as a catalyst that will be conducive to you being able to be in an environment where the people attending will be doing the same sort of thing. I use the wedding because it's the most relatable example. And unlike a funeral, which is typically and expectedly strictly family, a wedding tends to have more flexibility. You know, a friend may invite you, you may go to a wedding where it's a friend of the family that's maybe close. So it wouldn't be out of the question for you to go. Now, it may be something that is what we call IV only or invite only. It may be something that is invite only, where unless you have an invitation, you can't go. However, even if that's the case, there are going to be events prior to the actual wedding or reception where you can attend. In some cases, you may be able to attend a pre-party or an after-party, or maybe even the church service, depending. It all depends. But again, see it as an opportunity. Now, what if you don't have a wedding or wedding-like event to go to? Another thing that I've used in the past, this wasn't for Nigeria because I didn't need it. However, I used this in some of my other travels, specifically to Brazil, where I actually befriended someone over time and they ended up being invited to a wedding. Again, I have no blood relation, but we built a great connection over time, and I got close to the family that they literally mailed me an invitation from Brazil and insisted I had to attend. And so that may be an opportunity like that. Let's say it's not a wedding or a funeral or something that's familially close. There are conferences, for example, you can go to or look into that may be in your discipline. So let's say you're in technology, like I am. There are conferences that you can go to, whether it's engineering, whether it's medical, whatever the case might be. That's another avenue you can look into, okay? Look for events occurring in your field of study or interest that may be happening in Nigeria, okay? Or even if it's something you're just interested in. Let's say you're interested in agriculture, for example. Try to find some kind of formalized event going on, a destination event, if you will, that you can be a part of. That might be a conduit in. So that's I would say, the first thing you need to deal with. The tangibles, I would say. Now, again, all this presumes you either have a valid Nigerian passport, which you can use to travel, or you can get a Nigerian visa on your U.S. passport. After you've dealt with the tangibles, such as what's your in, like how do you get in? What is your conduit to get you into Nigeria? What's your reason for going? Okay, some kind of structured activity. The next part of it is, I would say, emotional and psychological. So let's say you do have an event that brings you to Nigeria, like I did. You have a wedding. It's going to be over a few days. You can go for a week. You have the funds to go. depending on the last time you've been to Nigeria, you're going to have to prepare yourself. Now, if the last time you went was a few years ago, you'll be fine. However, if it's like 20 years, you're going to be in for a culture shock. And you're from this place. You're going to be in for culture shock. So much has changed. What do? Again, once you get your tangible connection for going, then you have to treat it like you would any other trip to any other place that you've ever been to that wasn't familiar to you. You start to do some research, get travel guides, learn about customs and of the culture and other things that happen. Now, some of you say, well, if you're born in Nigeria, why do I have to learn the culture? You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. I learn something new every time I go to Nigeria, whether it's 2 years apart or 13. There's always something new that I say to myself, wow, I didn't know that. And I'm someone who's been, especially in the last 2-3 years, a lot more often. And there's still something that I see that, or experience that makes me say, wow, I didn't know that. And so, do that research. Unfortunately, there are not a ton of guidebooks like they were, oddly enough, I would say in the early 90s. However, YouTube is your friend. There are a lot of great content producers. Sassy Funke is one that comes to mind, but there are others that can give you insight to what to expect. And so that information is here. This particular podcast isn't focused specifically on travel on a macro scale, but really just little things that are helpful when I particularly travel that I feel might be helpful for others. And as this podcast evolves, I will try to be a lot more intentional in that, to give you tools that I've found helpful, that you may be helpful, that you may find helpful as well. And so, getting that psychological, emotional content taken care of will be key, because it'll help you enjoy your trip more if you're prepared mentally. Now, that's out of the scope of what I'm talking about today in depth, but you want to at least get a sense of what Nigeria is like when you'll be going. From the basics, what time zone is it in? Do they practice daylight savings or not? Okay. What are the denominations of money currently used? Okay. What's the exchange rate? Do you need a visa? How do you get a visa? Depending on where you're coming from, okay? Do you need to get a passport? And there are other things as well. We're not even talking about what the COVID requirements might require. That's another level that you'll have to research. But again, all these things you'll need to do, it's part of preparing you psychologically and emotionally for that trip. But the key thing is that you want to, again, get a tangible way to get back to connect, an excuse, a reason, if you will. And then once you have that, start preparing yourself emotionally and mentally to do that. Let me know if there are other opportunities or contexts that one may use to try to reconnect to Nigeria after being away for a long time that I may not have mentioned that you think might be useful for those listening. Also, please let me know if there are any intangibles that one ought to keep in mind in helping to make the reconnection as smooth as possible that I may not have mentioned. Please make a comment below. Take care, and thank you for listening.